I'm psychologist Dr. Bryan, and I'm honored today to bring you my conversation with Dr. Michael Pakaluk. He's my former philosophy professor, and he now teaches business ethics at the Bush School at the Catholic University of America. We talk about things like competition and how that lends itself to narcissism and inflated ego. We also talk about the integration of psychology with philosophy, faith, and theology. And finally, we look at our sinner in a movie, The Vanishing. This is the Catholic Center Show. Well, I'm very excited, and I greatly appreciate you being willing to do this. You've been very generous with your time for me personally over the years on my dissertation committee, phone calls. I mean, my budding podcast here. I can't tell if this is Christian charity or we are other selves.
Well, the best way that we can help ourselves is by helping other people. So I don't view this as charity in the sense that I'm giving something and losing. I'm gaining every time I do something to help you, Bryan, and I'm not really even helping you. I'm just spending time with you. You're so talented. I don't have to do anything.
We'll see. There are different types of talent. I mean, I think I've always been a bit intimidated by your intellectual abilities and your capacity to understand things. Well, I would say almost horizontally, the breadth of knowledge that you have and the precision of your thought. My gifts are to, I think, penetrate the other. I mean, that's the difference, I think, between a clinician and a philosopher.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm happy you say that. First of all, I feel that I'm stupid, actually, and that I've succeeded in hoodwinking you.
We can talk about that part of you that feels like a fraud.
Guess we all do.
We do. Especially earlier in our careers, I think. Earlier, we think that we're hoodwinking people, pulling the wool over their eyes.
I'm kind of getting to that point where I think I can kind of start taking victory laps. I mean, I don't want to sound hubristic, but look, I've raised 10 kids to adulthood, and they're flourishing and they're doing well. And I think I've written some good books. There are several more books. I hope with God's, God helps me, keeps me alive, I can finish before I die.
Those are the kids are the greatest accomplishment, though, of course.
Yeah, I mean, a ton of work. I mean, it's just a ton of work that's in the background there. Changing diapers, getting up at night, rocking them to sleep, listening them scream in cars, buckling them in and out of seats in cars, and all kinds of different stroller arrangements and different car configurations, and
certainly
and earning money on the side because you can't pay the bills, and it just I just can't even. I just need to go somewhere on retreat and sit around for a couple of days and just try to remember all that work, because it seems wrong that I worked so hard and did all that work and now I can't even remember it. It seems like I didn't even do it.
I imagine has there been a tension over the years between professional responsibilities and being present in the family?
Yeah, I think that's you mentioned young person. I mean, when I was trying to get tenure, I probably worked too much. I didn't know is what work I didn't need to do, and I just wasted a lot of time. Now I'm very, very efficient. Like I read a 2,000-word essay today for a book that I'm contributing to, and I just texted my wife. I don't even know how I managed to do that. I mean, I somehow squeezed it in. I drove my mom to the airport. She's going to Phoenix today, and then I had to take care of all kinds of correspondence and texts and messages because I did this podcast with Bob Royal yesterday, which is kind of going a little bit viral. But and then it's on Cardinal Fernandez. I don't know if you followed any of that stuff, but
I thought we were going to get there at some point because I read some of your blogs recently to catch up on where you're at.
So then I sat down and I said, let's see if I, this really needs to be done by this weekend. Let's see if I can write this thing. And I actually just wrote it, and I just turned out, well enough. It's a bit of an oddball contribution, but I think it turned out well enough.
What do you think accounts for the growth and efficiency?
I think it's writing is a difficult thing, and I think that first you're very much directed on a goal. So when I used to be a scholar, I'd just say, okay, or when I used to work as a scholar, I'd say, let's take the widest potentially relevant scope and cover all of this area in excruciating detail, and then I'll assemble it at the end. Whereas now I tend to
Sure.
think through what I need to say, and then I'm just study those things. But also a lot of room for serendipity. In fact, most things I write, I don't even know where it's going to go. I do think, to tell you the truth, I think the guidance of God is really important, like the Holy Spirit. And I pray, and it seems that whenever I pray, I get led to discover something that I didn't even know existed, which ends up being crucial for what I want to say.
Yeah, something emerges off the page as you're putting it down.
Yeah, it's often a matter of research, like finding a particular book or resource or something written in a book that it just seems like, how did I find this? I didn't even know it existed, and yet I did stumble upon it. It seems absolutely the perfect thing. So there's part of that, and then also writing. I had you'll like this once. I had you'll like this at once. I had a professor who commented about another professor. The one professor is Burton Drebin. The other is Willard Van Orman Quine. Quine was a famous or notorious behaviorist. And Drebin said about him that he was the perfect behaviorist writer because he actually didn't do any thinking except when he was writing. He just
behaved.
Like there's no interiority there. It's just what he wrote down was the only thing that he thought, apparently. But I've gone more in that direction. I realized that you actually think while you're writing something, and it's a huge mistake when you're beginning to write to think you're going to formulate your thoughts and then you're going to write them down. Yes. And then you can spend forever, and then you end up sitting down because you have to write because it's a deadline, and all of a sudden your thoughts get formulated. So I don't even worry about not having thoughts. I just start to write, and then the thoughts form.
Yeah, I think that's also true of the interview. I mean, coming into today, I'm getting off the page in terms of my preparation for interviews more and more with each one. I mean, I've been doing this for 5 months, and it's akin to clinical work, which is purely responsive for me. I have a very indirect style, but it is different. It's a different skill set that I'm developing, but I have vague ideas of where I want to go. But I think if I try and force that structure onto the conversation, you lose something. I interrupt people. It's unnatural. It's not organic, and it's less interesting.
Yeah, for sure. But just talk.
Yeah. Do you, when you write, do you imagine the response of your detractors or at least opposing arguments? And does that create a pressure for you to make your arguments bulletproof?
Yes, for sure. Well, there are Socratic writers who are always engaged in kind of back and forth, objection and reply. I don't really like to write that way. I think I'm more dogmatic. I like to think through my view so that it's completely sound and I know all the supporting steps and supporting evidence, and that it's a kind of armor without any chinks in it, and then I just present it. And the objections have already been built in because I've anticipated them and I've written my argument so that they can't have any kind of traction. Sure. That's the way I prefer to write, just more of a dogmatic person.
Yeah, though someone will find a way to rebut, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are different kinds of rebuttals. I mean, people misunderstand. They don't get the point. They take something and twist it. They don't see what you're getting at. Those are all forms of misunderstanding, I think, or they're ignorant, or they don't understand the state of the argument. Or
they project. Yeah, for emotional reasons. Yeah, their own interior experience, their unconscious is projected onto what you're writing, and it's filtered. Whatever you're saying is filtered through their presuppositions, right?
Yeah, if you write a bulletproof argument, then there shouldn't be those gaps where they can find space to project. But we can do it anyway.
Yeah, that's great. So with everything that you're writing now, I think I don't even know how to introduce you. When I look at the history of your accolades and accomplishments, I mean, for my audience, it's not primarily an academic audience, although I'm sure there's some academics. I'm trying to create a space for the everyman in some ways. But I mean, the list is just so long. And now you're at the Bush School.
Yeah.
And that was a bit surprising to me. I mean, it's a business school.
Yeah. It's completely surprising to me because I've been contemptuous of business schools for most of my life.
So is this because an interest in growing interest in economic models, or how did you land there? Because last we spoke, I think you're at Ave Maria.
Yeah, I landed there because now 20 years ago, I had a very good friend who was a forensic accountant. And at this time, I was working at Clark University in Worcester, and actually I had a visiting appointment at Brown for a semester, and he was doing forensic malpractice work in accounting in Providence. He was investigating bank failures in Providence, and he was on teams of prosecutors for bank failures. So we would travel together, and then it's a funny story. My first book was on Aristotle's Ethics, actually my second book. It took me 10 years to write, Oxford University Press.
Yep.
And if you add up all the hours I worked on that book, I should do that exercise. I did, actually, because Mark saw me working. I go and teach my courses at Brown. You have a 2-2 load. It doesn't take that much time to do it. And then he'd see me work an additional 8 hours on this book. And this is a guy who was doing consulting work, and he wouldn't pick up a piece of paper if he wasn't being paid at the time, probably $400 an hour, right?
Sure.
So he's asking me, Michael, you're working so industriously on this book. What do you think you're going to be paid for this? He's somebody in business. In business, you don't work for free. It's regarded as unmanly, unprofessional, unwomanly. It's just not what you're doing. You don't ask anyone to work for free.
Unmanly.
Yeah.
Why unmanly?
Well, it's unmanly not to pay somebody for what they do. It's like freeloading. If you want somebody to do something for you and not do something in return, that's like freeloading. That's unmanly.
So, yeah, but not when you're producing it. For the person probably receiving the service, sure, that would be unmanly. But it's unmanly for the person that's producing something as well?
No, if somebody's doing something for you and
Yes.
you don't think that person should be paid a fair wage for their professional work.
It's a bit emasculating for them.
It's emasculating for you because you're not pulling your share.
I see.
Every market transaction is a two-way thing. It's two people in win-win situations. So you want to profit without doing anything to help the other person. I maybe that's not the right word, unmanly, but it just kept leapt into my mind. So deal with that as a psychologist, but.
I want to talk about masculinity today,
good,
so that's great.
Good.
Yeah.
So in his world, you don't do a lot of work unless you're getting. You don't do any work unless you're getting paid for your work.
Sure.
In the world of academia, people work for free all the time, and it's kind of a racket. Let me tell you the main. This is a digression, but the main racket is that the presses know that professors want to work for the prestige. Yes. So. You have these commissioning editors from presses like Cambridge, very distinguished presses like Cambridge or Oxford. They come to you and they say, we're interested in doing this book. Like they have a million guidebooks, guidebook to so-and-so, guidebook to Locke, guidebook to Spinoza, guidebook to Aquinas, handbook. Then they have the handbooks, right? Handbook to Locke, handbook of Spinoza, handbook of Aquinas. Then the companion. I'm not kidding you. They have all these things and nobody reads them. And they go in libraries, and they know that if Cambridge University Press produces a companion to Aristotle, it will be purchased by X number of libraries, let's say 2,000 libraries, and that's sufficient for them to make a profit on the book.
Sure.
And so all they need to do is add titles. The more titles they add, the more profits that they have. So these commissioning editors go around and they get professors to commit to do these things. And you get paid nothing for these things, pennies really. But you put it on your CV, and they're the ones who are getting paid. The press is getting paid, the library is getting paid, but you're getting paid nothing. So that's kind of a racket. So anyway, if it's a really, really good piece of scholarship that can contribute to something that's lasting, then it makes sense. But if it's just going to go in some kind of library somewhere and nobody's ever going to read it, then it's actually wasting your life.
Yeah. Well, I wonder in today's social media climate and the opportunity for self-branding and marketing, if that's changing. I know it's a different skill set for an academic to edge into that space of self-promotion to put things out there, but you see it. I mean, in many ways, this whole show is an effort by me. I mean, I'm not getting paid anything right now, but I mean, it would be great if I got ad revenue and got a couple 100,000 followers and such. So, I mean, even on Amazon, self-publishing and ebooks and things like that. I wonder why more professors haven't entered into that space. Maybe it's just time constraints.
Well, what they do is, in a sense, what I did. So I looked at one of my books, which was very prestigious, Oxford University Press, and I
Yeah.
needed to consult it. I lost my own copy, which I'd gotten. I'd misplaced it. So I went to the library, and I think it was at Ave Maria University. And this is after I'd been there for 6 years. And there are a lot of graduate students in theology whom I consulted, and some pretty serious people in philosophy. But I suppose, it's not Harvard, admittedly. So, but I didn't know what I was expecting. But I looked at the book, and I looked at that slip of paper that they have at the back of the book, where they were still doing the old system where you just stamp it so you can see how many people have taken out your book. And I think in
Yes.
6 years it was stamped twice, right? So like, this is a book which I remember one of the reviews, maybe one of the top professors at Princeton said, "I'm glad I own this book. It's part of my collection." Like it was very well judged by a handful of critics. It's an
Yeah.
excellent book of its kind, and yet maybe two people are going to read it. I can tell you, I think my sales for the last quarter of this book were 3 copies. So it's selling at the rate of maybe 10 copies a
Which
year.
book? Which
Right?
book was this?
This is this philosophy of action and moral psychology in Aristotle. It's that one. It's
Gotcha.
I edited. I have a paper in that.
Yeah.
I think I was working on that when I was teaching you, but
Yes.
the but the point is that you get a reputation and you get tenure and you have status. But in the end, if you might be the kind of person who actually wants to do good, like wants your life to make a difference for others.
Mm.
And so if your work just goes in a library somewhere, it's never cited, it's never read, it seems completely pointless. Now, some people just kind of just drop out. I mean, a lot of professors
Yeah,
do that. They
I can understand
just
that.
yeah, they just do their courses and they take it easy, and they're not getting paid that much for their skills. I mean, they're not getting paid the way a lawyer or a doctor is being paid.
Sure.
So they're getting paid a moderate amount. So they're professionals doing a moderate amount of work. Everything seems fair to them. They just stop. For me,
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I wanted to put my talents to work to influence for the good my society and help improve my society. That's the main reason why I started doing these gospel translations. But let me get back to the business school thing, which you asked me about. Right? So I was going
Yes.
back and forth to Brown with this forensic accountant. He said, Michael, how much do you think you're going to earn from this? And I said, I don't know, Mark. This was named. When all said and done, it might be $5 an hour. And he laughed at that,
Mm.
right? Because I wasn't doing it. I was doing it for its own sake, as a contribution to scholarship. This was a significant series. It was a new way of reading Aristotle. It was better than previous scholarship. It was very prestigious. It would, make me internationally recognized as a scholar, which it did. It accomplished all those things. So I really wasn't looking for a lot of money from this. So it wasn't just thrown away in a vault either. I mean, people do consult it. So, but I took his point, and then he approached me and he said, "This is right after Enron and WorldCom was, spectacular failures." He said, "Why don't we collaborate on a book on accounting ethics?" And I knew nothing about it. So I, started working on it, and we wrote one book, which was pretty bad, and then we wrote a second book, which is, I didn't think it's that great, but a lot of people thought it was great. It's been translated to Japanese and Serbo-Croatian and other languages. And somebody told me that in Japan it was required reading for all CPAs. So I don't know if that's true or not. And and then a
That's
third
cool.
book, which I think is really good on accounting ethics, but it's too difficult and therefore it hasn't been adopted. So it hasn't been a big money maker, but it's a really good book. So we did this, and then I started getting hired doing consulting work in accounting regulation, accounting professionalism, because I had to acquire a lot of knowledge about that to do this thing. And I'm a quick study, and maybe I'm smarter than I admitted to later or earlier.
Yes.
I learned a lot. I was a lot about this. I became an expert really. And so then, that put me in a position of getting hired by business school to teach
And that's where the
professional
money
ethics for
is.
account.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my salary doubled, frankly, but finally I can
Oh,
pay bills, and yeah, it's you get paid a lot more in business school than you do in a school of theology or philosophy. So,
oh
so that
yes.
makes a lot of sense. I should have done that a long time ago. Because here's why. Look, I've I've never taught at a high-powered research university. I have looked for jobs in those circumstances, but I haven't gotten them, and maybe it's all for the good because you're at a high-powered research university, spending a lot of time advising dissertations. You're placing students in their jobs. You're engaged in every hire that goes. You have a lot of work besides your research and your
Administrative
teaching.
extras. Yeah.
It's all involved. Yeah, it all has to do with the graduate program. It's not really administrative, but the graduate school has its own demands, which are
Yes.
significant. So
Yes.
if you're at a school where you can do kind of high level undergraduate teaching, that may be the best place to be because you can kind of iron out some courses, you teach those courses, and then you have the other free time you can write. And so a lot of people at research universities look at me and say, "Wow, you're prolific, and why are you looking for a job at a high-powered research university? You have really the situation I would desire." So I should have heeded that advice earlier on.
Hmm.
But so for me, there's always been a gap between my research, which has often been very technical, the things I write and concerned about. You need to know Greek, for example, to do it. And what I'm teaching, I'm just teaching Plato's dialogues, things that are
Yeah.
introductory and so on.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe like the 15th time around or the 20th time around teaching, Plato's Phaedo, I thought to myself, why am I doing this? Because I'm just teaching these courses to put food on the table. That's why I'm teaching Plato's dialogues, right? It could be business. I mean, why not just teach service courses in business and and
Sure.
and make more money? Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, our institution, the IPS Institute for the Psychological Sciences, they paid me a lot more money than the university was paying me.
Mm.
So I thought, well, why not just teach courses that in a business school? And I didn't take any concrete steps, but the thought had occurred to me many times. Like if your research is here and your teaching is here, and you're just teaching service courses, why not teach somewhere you could be paid a little bit more than you are?
Yeah, that makes me sad though. I one of my former professors from my history undergraduate was left the university that I was at, and she had told me that generally the state schools pay better than the private schools, and that's why a lot of really top-notch scholars end up at state schools, and they don't get the same prestige, but they get paid better. But something she told me is in terms of why she left was that there's less um, focus and funding on the humanities nowadays,
No,
and
that's definitely true.
yeah,
Like
and
there's a
that makes
there's
me
a their
so
hierarchy
sad.
of pay. There's hierarchy of pay. So the best paid people in typical university, say Clark University, which is a moderate sized or small, almost boutique university in Worcester, Massachusetts, best paid
Yeah.
faculty members are going to be they had a very small business program, but they would be the best compensated. The next would be the economists because they could go out and get a job in the private
Mhm.
sector anytime, and they be compensated at least the mid six figures. And then you have going to have the scientists and the mathematicians, and then you'll have other social scientists, and then at the very bottom are going to be the philosophers. So in that hierarchy of things, the philosophers are at the bottom. Maybe the only level lower than that are theologians. So maybe at my university right now, Catholic University of America, and theologians are also low because they're used to paying priests, and so you don't have to pay them
All right.
anything, right? So yeah, there's that. So I just have to tell people, look, I have 15 children, and that for them that kind of myself. There are times when I've lived by myself, like I've been a scholar at Oxford for like 2 months during the summer, and
Yeah.
I eat a can of soup and a slice of bread, and I'm very austere. I have no. I'm drinking a fine glass of Armagnac right now. I mean, I can very
Yes.
easily accommodate myself to refined elite tastes because I do
Yes.
love refined things. This is $200 a bottle, by the way.
There we go.
But I, but I'm also quite content, probably more content, living like a very austere monk. And if I
Sure.
didn't have 15 kids, I could live on 30,000 a year. I could live on 50 easily. I could travel all over the place on 50,000 a year. But
Sure.
I've got a lot of responsibilities, and I can't impose monkish life on my family.
No, I mean, talk about something unmasculine, right? I mean,
True.
the
Yeah,
dimension
exactly.
of provision is very
Yeah.
important to the male psyche.
Yeah.
Um,
So anyway,
yeah.
it's almost beyond any choice or deliberate plan of mine. I ended up in a business school, but now let me just say I love it because my colleagues are former executives at GE, or they were in finance or consulting, and they're really interesting people. They have all kinds of strengths that I don't have,
Yes.
and they have practical rationality. So it's kind of like,
Yes.
I was at Harvard, and I was the top of my class, and I was a philosopher, and he's just near all those other people who are, doing anything else except philosophy. Because to my mind, philosophy was the only serious discipline. Maybe mathematics had some standing, right? Well, it turns out that these people were very smart, right? And they went
Turns
in,
out.
they went into business, and they went into finance. They managed hedge funds. They did banking, and they have their minds haven't been quiet. They've been very busy, but they've been busy in very different areas. So, there's this extreme exercise of intelligence in, say, the world of the financial markets, which is very clever. It's very interesting. It has its own puzzles and so on. And to me, it's like a midlife or a little bit later discovery, and I just find it completely fascinating. So to me, it's like a entirely new area. Not to mention now political economy and economics, which my wife that's her specialty, and I've been reading a lot in that. I think it's just really, really, really interesting. So it's why not?
Yeah, sure. Well, is there a part of you that bemoans leaving the project of how to live well in your past?
What do you mean, how to live well? Don't we all
Oh, I
have
mean
that
that
project as
we do, but
Christians,
I mean, at least
sinners?
intellect. Sure, sure. I mean, but intellectually, though, I mean, that was your focus on how to live well in a scholarly sense. It wasn't how to increase your portfolio. It was. I mean, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for the time where I learned philosophy and theology from you, which informs all of my psychology. If I didn't have
Mm,
that, I mean, I'm rudderless in trying to help people. It's not as if,
mm.
I mean, from a spiritual perspective, from God's perspective, I
Yeah.
mean, which do you think he values more? you know?
Well, look, kind of course I taught you, I also taught at Ave Maria University for 6 or 7 years, how many years I was there.
Mm,
And I think I have a lot of students like you who, I don't know if I required as the assignment in your course that you keep careful notes and you hand in your notes, but I have students who walk around with this kind of thick book of 300 pages of notes that
mm,
they took in my course, and it's like a guide for their lives, and that's good. But on the other hand, I did that for 10 years, so we don't have to
mm.
do everything forever. Um,
Sure.
and I do fold a lot of that into my teaching of professional ethics and into
Yeah, there you
my
go. Yeah, yeah,
teaching of political economy. But I
yeah.
think the other question is this kind of project of becoming an authority, or a recognized expert. And okay, so that was, you might want to say, my goal. I want to become the top, most respected, admired Aristotle scholar in the whole world. It was probably my goal, right? And there's always, with this kind of thing, you need to be at the right institution, so get a position at Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard or something like that, so that matches what your abilities are. And um, I've left that world, and I'm glad that I've left that world for two reasons. One is that it's too narrow a world. It's turned in on itself. The people are involved in questions and problems that are probably too scholastic. They probably shouldn't be,
Mm,
really smart human beings probably shouldn't be spending their lives working on these problems. But then there's a tremendous play of pride, envy, arrogance, competitive spirit in the bad sense, ambition in the bad sense.
mm.
Um, this, you're talking about, trying to promote yourself. Well, that can be nasty, as we know. There's something, I
Definitely.
think, even worse in academia. This kind of, struggle the most honored or the most distinguished. I think it's really of the devil. And I was too easily caught in that because I do have a sense of the noble and the kind of inherent goodness of really good scholarship.
Sure.
So go ahead.
No, I'm thinking, I've been thinking a lot about this question myself because, I would like to get to heaven someday and to explore my interior, uh, just landscape in terms of what is motivating me to put out a podcast.
Mm.
And whether or not that's driven by some sort of psychological wound from my history or lack of affirmation that I received such that I'm overcompensating. And then I will finally be loved if the whole world hears Dr. Bryan's podcast. Well, it's not as simple as all that. I'd like to think I'm generally well-intentioned. In my mind, consciously, it's more of an effort to, um, spread the good news. It's the long and short
Mm.
of it. It is to
Yeah.
serve others. It is to create a space where people can dialogue once again, in a cancel culture world where it's an anti-cancel culture show. Let's bring people of different perspectives and faiths and come together and be able to connect on a human level. So there is the high ideal, which is driving me. But does that need to be purified? Absolutely. Is there a thread of my own ego and narcissism as part of the project? Definitely. And thankfully, I've surrounded myself with colleagues who are also do what I do. And when we
Hmm.
come together and talk about these things and we talk about why I'm feeling as stressed as I am about it at certain times, like, why am I stressed about this? If this is God's work, then it's God's work. Then He'll
Hmm.
make it grow, and I don't need to really
Yeah.
concern myself about it.
Yeah.
But if it's about me and the false idea that I'm going to receive, then that's an empty project,
Yeah.
and it's not good for my soul.
Yeah. Absolutely. There is always that temptation. Fortunately, you and our Catholics, we're not Lutherans or Calvinists who believe in the total depravity of human nature. So if you're
Yes.
like that, you think there's no way out of that box. You're always going to be selfish no matter what you try to do. But we
Mhm.
don't think that. We think it's a matter of just correcting your intention. As you said,
Definitely.
purify. So it's very easy to go a little bit off the rails by exaggeration, can be concerned about how many, likes you're getting, how many views you're getting,
Yeah, exactly.
how
Yes.
much attention you're getting.
Yes.
Um, but then just correct we don't have to fret about whether we're caught in this box of narcissism. We just correct our intention and move on. It's really very simple if you're a Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I trust as much as I can. I'm growing in trust to the Holy Spirit here. And just recently, when I started to unearth these things in myself with the help of colleagues and friends, and I started to let go and detach from desiring the views and was more
Mm.
present in my life with my family and friends or my day job, my full-time job. Well, guess
Mm.
what God does then? Well, now it starts to grow.
Right.
Now it starts to grow in a way that I couldn't have anticipated or planned. Some random tweet that I threw out there, or certain guests, or just the right moment if it was popular in the news that happened to launch when I was discussing a given topic 2 months before with a guest, and that caught some synergy. It's not huge right now, but in terms of the rate of growth, the show is doing well. But
Yeah.
that's all happened outside of my worrying about it.
Yeah, just pray and trust in God, and that's the best and the only course. I love golf because it teaches so many lessons of life. And 2 weekends ago, I was at a conference for the Heritage Foundation because my wife was on a panel at this conference, and it was at a place called the Cloisters on Sea Island, Georgia. And I don't know any of those places, but this is like Myrtle Beach and
Yeah, yeah.
Kiowa Island, just really Jekyll Island, like really, really beautiful,
Mm.
ritzy places. And this hotel, the Cloisters, the G8 summit meeting was held there in 2003. Like it's really posh. It's like really the top 5-star type place. So
Yeah.
just to be in that world and not be paying a lot of money for it is kind of fun. But I one morning I brought my golf clubs. I played something called the Seaside course there, which they have PGA tournament there,
Mm.
and I did very well in a 20-mile-an-hour wind. I shot an 82. So your guests who know about golf will be impressed by that because it's not an easy course. But that's not important. I'm not here to brag about shooting 82 on the Seaside course. What I'm here to say is what exactly you're saying, that throughout this round, you're engaged in this battle against your own thoughts about yourself. So
Yes.
when you begin to think about your score, I've just parred 4 holes in a row. You know
Yes.
you're going to get a double bogey on the next hole.
Yes.
You have to
Yes.
keep your intention pure and just
Yes.
say, I'm going to try to strike this ball the best I can and let the score take care of itself. That's
Yes.
exactly what you're talking about, that kind of inward turn thing where you turn to yourself, away from your work, away from the excellence, the good you're trying to do, and you just mess everything up. So
Yeah.
trust in
Yeah.
God, do your good work, and just don't worry about that.
Yeah. Golf is a very projective enterprise, I think,
Yeah.
because it's just you and yourself. And
Oh,
like
yeah.
golfing is as simple as standing there and hitting a ball in a particular direction. But the interior experience of how you
Oh,
perceive that, and then the consistency and how to remain in the present, but mindfully present in the moment with each shot and not think about the previous one or the next one. It's a challenge.
yeah. And furthermore, you can't try too hard. This is a really funny thing, right? You have to be serious. You have to be collected. You have to be concentrated. But once you start
Yes.
really trying,
Yes.
or even you might even say really caring,
Yes.
then it doesn't work.
Right.
It's so puzzling and interesting. I think truthful at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's important to go golfing with good friends because then you can focus on one another and not on your game as much. It's a helpful distraction. I'm also, it comes to my mind as you were talking about how there happens to be a score. I'll never forget a conversation I had with an exorcist once who was helping me in my clinical work, and he was talking about how the devil loves competition. And I pushed back a little bit and I said, well, wait a minute. We're not ever allowed to be competitive. He said, no, we need to nuance it. So the pursuit of excellence is a wonderful thing. It can manifest um, God's omnipotence. It's the exercising of our gifts and our virtue, and we want to do our best. But if it's competitive in terms of ranking myself above or below someone else,
Mm,
I'm putting someone down to feel better about me, which is the
yep,
temptation. That's a
yep,
problem.
yep.
So the way out is to want to do your best and want your opponent to do their best.
Mm,
And then there happens to be a score, but literally
yep,
wanting them to do their best, even if that's better than your performance.
yep. Well put. And that's good sportsmanship too. So
Yeah.
you're never supposed to root against anybody.
Right.
And if you get beaten, you want to be beaten by somebody who's doing really well and
Right.
congratulate on them. It's very beautiful. It's very human, and it's not devilish at all. It's the opposite of devilish. The screw tape letters are just such a great example of that kind of malicious hierarchy.
Yes. Yes.
Have you read
And
them, screw tape letters?
I've circled around them. I think if they've been assigned in classes and I've read the Cliff's notes and I've talked about them enough, but
So
I can't go
you
deep.
can listen to him. John Cleese, John
Oh,
Cleese
of course.
from Monty Python.
Yes.
He and A Fish Called Wanda, which is a hilarious movie, but it's a little bit off color. We have to warn your watchers, but it's hilarious. But he did a recording of screw tape letters, and it's
Yes.
just brilliant. Yeah, you have to get that and listen to
I
it.
will. Yeah. Yeah. And what was the what came to your mind when you were thinking about the
A
competitiveness of the screw tape letters?
screw tape letters is a kind of uncle demon
Mm-hmm.
advising a nephew demon how
How to
to trip
corrupt
up
people.
and tempt, and yeah, he's
Yeah.
assigned to this one guy to corrupt and tempt him. But there's the if I remember correctly, it's by C.S. Lewis. The notion that they use for domination is actually an eating metaphor. So you devour the demon who's below you, and you get devoured by demons who are above you. It's not
Yes.
service, but it's consumption actually.
Yes.
So it's this kind of, we talk about dog eat dog. It's that sort of thing in hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something besides competition is making comparisons. So a lot of saints will say, well, don't make comparisons. So,
It's the thief of
you
joy,
know,
right?
yeah, right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And I think it sucks the gratitude out of your spirit.
Oh, it does. Yeah, how true
Yeah.
that is.
And it's easily refuted by uh, when someone experiences jealousy or envy of someone else by a
Mm.
way of comparison. All you have to suggest is that, okay, I'll give you their life, but all of their life. You can't cherry pick the things that you like.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, very good
and
point.
and then it quickly becomes no. I'll stay with my lot.
Yes. Like,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I did actually want to talk to you about your friendship book.
Probably a lot of people get divorced and remarried multiple times on those grounds.
Yeah, the jealousy grounds.
Yeah, the cherry picking. Like that,
Mm.
woman looks a lot better than my current wife. Then
Oh, right.
it's not the whole package you're
The
seeing, or
infidelity. Yeah, there's an illusion that occurs when
yeah.
typically with infidelity, it's there's some type of block to the intimacy in the marriage, and there's a part of myself that I cannot share, and that's a function of the dynamic. It's not just me, it's not
Mm,
just my spouse, but there's something terrifying about sharing
mm,
who I am with this person. And
yeah.
oftentimes it's both. It's your developmental history, but it's, I'm fear of criticism or judgment, whatever. But then you meet this other person where that part of yourself is allowed to emerge.
Mm,
And the challenge then is to say, well, if that does happen, and it could just naturally happen over the course of things, these could be unconscious processes, then it's to say, wait a second, why am I interested in this other person? What am I withholding from my spouse?
yes.
So how can I get to a point where I bring that to my spouse instead of looking
Yes.
elsewhere?
Yeah.
But to your point, there is a fantasy as if just this part of me and the response of the other person outside of the marriage is all that relationship is.
Yeah. A good
It
point. Yeah.
it's a fantasy, right?
Yep.
But follow it all the way through and imagine.
Yep.
I also think this is the basis for things like pornography,
Mm,
where you know, there's so much projection onto the pornographic image or a pornographic video, where a still image of a beautiful woman. On the male, this is just a male side of things.
mm,
I will
yeah.
speak to the female engagement in pornography, but on the male side of things, it's very psychological. There's
Mm,
no there's no desire for just the still image. You are desiring what you imagine that woman to be.
yeah.
And the illusion is dispelled when you actually think about, okay, how would you like to date that porn star? You know, would you like to bring her home to your mom? Are you going to have sophisticated conversations where you emotionally support one another? It's the actual real
Yeah.
life, and that's what marriage is. It's real life. It's a shared
Yeah.
life, and it's pain and it's suffering. Like that is pornography is an escape from the hardships, I think, of real
Mm,
relational
yeah. Yeah.
dimensions.
Very true.
Yeah. So tell me about friendship, though. I saw that you wrote this book, and I think, at least in the Catholic world, there's a developing sense of interest in friendship and what it is. I think
Mm,
most are familiar with C.S. Lewis and
yes.
the Four Loves, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you put together an anthology.
Yes.
What did you find? I mean, I imagine you were familiar with it before you wrote the book, obviously, but was there anything you discovered new that informed your perspective? I mean, maybe even on a personal level with your friends. What was most surprising for you or interesting?
Well, that was really my first book, and I do think that anthology. I do think that I misunderstood Aristotle at the time because I think his use of the word philia, which is the Greek word, is not really captured in our translation of it as friendship. That he's much more of a social scientist, and he's interested in the way that human beings, we want to say, bond, how
Mm.
they coalesce and they form units, which are more than one, and what the character of the actions, as much as the affections, are within those units, and what causes them to come to be and to disappear in the relationship to virtue and to the state. That's what he's really interested in. And
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't. I think it's wrong to call that friendship. I mean, he does spend a little bit of time talking about these more private relationships that we call friendships, but that's not really his target. Maybe he thinks these private relationships are revelatory of the phenomenon in general. That can be so.
Yeah.
But I think probably, to be honest, I think I became interested in. I mean, first of all, you're writing a dissertation. You have to find some topic that no one else is writing
Yeah.
on. So that's the main thing. And there's a very nice way of setting up the problem at the time, which is that in moral philosophy, people usually taught that there are basically two systems or types of moral um, deliberation. One is deontology, where you think of morality as a system of rules and you figure out what you
Right.
ought to do based on those rules. And then there's consequentialism or utilitarianism. You think of morality as a system of benefits and outcomes and
Yes.
maximal states. And you think of
Yes.
morality in terms of leading to some kind of maximization. And that friendship looked like it was in between. It was neither one of those nor the other. And so it was interesting for that reason, maybe a way of kind of breaking out of that. It seemed to be fruitless quarrel between those two systems. Find something in between.
According to
And
Aristotle, was his way out of it? I mean, or for you personally, what do you mean a way
that was
out?
just a nice way of setting up the problem in terms of
Hmm.
contemporary philosophy, why friendship would be kind of an interesting thing to look at in the realm of
Sure.
moral philosophy.
Hmm.
So I approached it at first in that way because I needed a dissertation topic. It was kind of easy to see what place it would have. It was related to McIntyre's After Virtue, which had just come out. It's kind of new interest in virtue
Yes.
theories. So it was interesting for that reason, but then also personally. I mean, I don't think I really had a lot of friendships, and I kind of realized and that you might even say that's just a lack which everybody experiences in modern life. And
Yeah.
the internet maybe fools people into thinking that they do have friendships. It's not, friendship on the internet is not a real friendship because there's no
No.
sacrifice. You have to sacrifice. You have to give your time and you have to give up something in order
So it
to help
has
your
to be
friend.
intentional. It has to be intentional.
Intentional, yeah.
Yeah.
And there can't be that many. Our self-correct about that. And you can have hundreds of friends on the internet, I guess, or thousands. So
Yeah.
so I was fascinated by that. I mean, probably my mode of life and my personality are probably inimical to friendship. So somebody who likes to be alone in the library and study for 10 hours a day, and who's very intellectual and rather austere, where I used to be very Puritan. People thought of me as like a Puritan
Mm.
because I was very austere. And and then when you become a Christian and you're in an atheist or you perceive to be a very hostile atheist environment, then you're kind of suspicious,
Mm.
and you don't have patience with frivolity. So why should I just go to this, have some drinks with this person and talk about something stupid like sports when there are much more serious things that we need? So that I think that everything in my life was set up so that I actually wouldn't have friends or pursue friendships.
Mm.
But then when I became a Christian, I began to realize, no, you really do have to. That's part of the human good. In fact, that's the way laypersons spread the gospel, by having friendship. So I started kind of thinking about this in my own life, and not that I gave, I couldn't even say what I just said with any kind of clarity or self-understanding.
Yeah.
But it was just, this is an area that's interesting because it's so, a lot of people are drawn to things. They want to think about them because they're so difficult for them. And they may not be conceptually that difficult or intrinsically difficult, but it's difficult for them. And so they find them a challenge.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what's
So
coming to my mind is,
yeah,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead. I mean, my wife
No,
in college says that she, started with political philosophy, and she had no problem writing 8 papers, and therefore she wasn't interested in it. It's just economics seemed much more difficult, so she went into economics because it was challenging and perplexing for
yeah.
her. Maybe some
Yes.
people find economics very straightforward, but it wasn't for her.
So
And
as you're
then
saying,
and then
for
when
you.
you work on something that's difficult for you,
Mm.
you actually learn it very well because you have to work through and fight for every increment of understanding. You have to learn all of the steps. Like there's a famous logician. He was at Notre Dame, and I can't remember his name, but one of my friends took courses with him, and he's a
Mm.
horrible teacher because he's so brilliant. And he would write these long proofs on the board, and someone asked him a question about it. He said, "Well, first, he always answered every question the same. Well, you have this, and then you have this, and then you have this, and then you have this." And that's how he explained it. He couldn't
Right.
explain it because the steps
Yeah.
were all so clear to
It was
him.
too. It probably went so quickly in his mind. His
He
processing
couldn't.
speed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when you're struggling with something that's difficult for you, then you have to learn every single
This.
step.
Yes. Yes. For
And
sure.
eventually you become very fast at it, and then it'll be very well founded because everything's been worked out. If you're a
Yeah.
smart person, you'll become very fast at it.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I had this vague, vague sense of a growing heart in your understanding of relationality, relationships, and in friendships. I mean, even with where you began on the question of modern philosophical conceptions of morality, I mean, it's very simple to me, morality and how to think about it for me. And maybe that's limited by my scope, but I think of it as simply as the morality given to us is for our good. It's relational. I think of my child, and I tell my child not to touch the hot stove, not because I don't want him to have fun and touch the glowy orange light, right? It's because I love him, and it is good for him to not touch the hot stove. So that's how I perceive how God gives us morality. It's not a series of prescriptions that say, I don't want you to have fun. I don't want you to enjoy yourself. I don't want you to experience like this sort of tyrannical set of rules that are designed to control me in order to serve the rule giver. You know, when you come into a loving context, in a relational context, then rules make sense. Even in proper parenting, there are different styles, of course. I say to my son, who's 5, he needs to start taking out the trash, right? He's 5. Take out the trash. And I don't want to take out the trash, right? You get the resistance, of course. I mean, there's the extreme of take out the trash because I said so. That's the tyrant. And there may be moments where you know, in the development of the child, you have to say, because I said so, right? But then there's the other side, which is the permissive parenting, which is, okay, you don't have to take it out. Right. Because you're in fear of the child's emotionality. But
I haven't persuaded you, therefore I guess you don't have to take it out.
Right. So, but I think the virtue in the mean here, and that's something I learned from you about virtue being in the mean, is I know you've had a hard day at school. I know you're tired right now. I know the last thing you want to do is take the trash out. So it's empathy, relationality first, then teaching. But I'm not going to be here to take out the trash forever. And I want to teach you responsibility, and I want you to earn an allowance. So take it out. And then the directive at the end. I think oftentimes today, in terms of morality, it's just the directive without the relationship. And so that's why you have people rejecting morality, rejecting church teaching, et cetera, et cetera. There's no connectedness there. So, so I just, as you were talking, that was my first response to the ideas of modern conceptions of morality. But then when you begin to talk about the Christian exchange of faith occurring through the vehicle of friendship, and how that was transformative for you, I thought of how, you know, Christ calls us friends. Right? And it is to want the good of the other for the sake of the other. And within friendship, it's not just this is an interesting question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but an interesting question I have is getting away from the gaze of I, thou, where friendship is us standing shoulder to shoulder and focusing on that third object together. And that third object should be some goodness for both of us, right? In a Christian friendship. That seems to me to be much more male by nature, because it is way more comfortable for me to learn about you while we talk about golf than to say, how are you? And there's nothing actually wrong with that, as long as once in a while, 10% of the time, Michael, how are you? But 90% of the time, it's very comfortable for us to be there. But typically in the feminine psychology, it is more I, thou related. And so
definitely.
do we need a female Aristotle to talk to us about friendship? I mean, do you have any thoughts on how this is layered on it, like layered on, or at least expressed so far through only a masculine lens?
That's a good point, because I think if we had greater sensitivity to a specifically female friendship, we'd also see how it is actually very pervasive. So I think people who say that, for example, this had been a degradation of public discourse because of the role of women in society. Well, certainly it's been changed, and feelings are much more important. And the news is much more about reactions and emotions than it is about what's actually happening. So, you know, obviously one doesn't want to engage in any kind of exaggerated stereotyping, but nonetheless, there are real sex differences. And, you know, I think you're right that friendship has been, you know, we have just a one-sided understanding of it. There's bringing golf and friendship, a funny story about one man plays golf with his friend, and I can't remember what it is that's going on in his friend's life. Either his wife had surgery, or they had a baby, or maybe she left him, or something like that. And he comes home, and his wife asks him, "Well, what did you learn about this thing that is happening in his life?" He said, "What do you mean? What I learned about it? We were playing golf together." And it's just like we were.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to talk about that.
Yes. Yes.
We just, and that, women would find it completely baffling that you could be with somebody for 5 hours and not talk
Yeah.
about anything that's personal, and actually not
Yeah.
want to talk about anything that's personal.
Right. Well, but I think we need each other, right? That is the balance, is to grow in the gifts,
Yeah.
the masculine to grow in the feminine gifts, and
Well,
for
very
us
true.
to engage. The
Yeah.
temptation of the man is to be, the word that comes to mind, but I don't mean this precisely, but autistic in a way.
Yeah. Oh,
To
yeah.
to see the world
And that's
as one of things and not others.
that's so much the case in, I think, okay, a stereotype. I think it's true. Northern European and Anglo society. It's compared with I was watching this new film. We're going to talk about films, right? I was
Yes.
watching this. Have you heard of the Society of the Snow?
I just heard about it. I haven't seen it though.
Yes, the Society of the Snow is a new film about that Uruguayan plane that crashed in the Andes that had rugby players back in 1972, I think it was, and how they survived, and they had to resort to cannibalism, and a couple of them climbed out of the mountain and got down to civilization, and they were rescued. 17, I think, out of the original 40 or 50.
Wow.
But it's this one, the old film, which is called Alive, and I think that's 1990 or something like that.
I remember that one. I
That
remember
was
Alive.
kind of Hollywood version and very simplified, and it was filmed in the Canadian Rockies. And this one attempts to be, and it was actually one of the survivors plays a role in the film. This attempts to be exactly accurate, and it's actually filmed in the very place where the plane crashed. And the reconstitution of the plane is so exact, and the people are their appearance changes so dramatically. They don't look like Hollywood at all. That at some points they superimpose like a black and white picture that was taken at the top, a helicopter rescuing them, upon the film, and it's exactly the same. The film has recreated what happened there. But I just, the reason I'm bringing that in is that, and this film also spends a lot of time kind of introducing you to the characters before they get on the plane, which is really important. And you see the distinctive mode of relationship in a country like Uruguay. You see the softness and the emotion, and the abrazos, and it's the love of family, and
it's like the romance
unabashed
sensibilities.
unabashed display of love of your family and your sisters and your brothers, and hugging your friends, and not putting on airs, and just everybody being relaxed, and liking to be equal. It's so appealing, and it's whatever you think about illegal immigration, if they can come to the United States and bring that kind of spirit, we'll be better off, because that's so attractive. It's so. I used to go to Mexico. I used to teach in Mexico, and that's what I loved about Mexico. I mean, Mexico taught me so much about just being a better human being, because they do have this kind of intuitive, natural friendliness about them. As you say, we're like autistic in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, the American Western masculine construct. I mean, I'm not a cultural philosopher or anything, but it seems to me that it's got to be reflective of a Puritan influence and repression of the emotional life, and then also just the westward expansion and what was required, and then the idealization of the solitary cowboy tough guy that, imagine the people that needed to leave the East Coast to go west. What kind of, I mean, surely some of it was a desire for land and a better life, but some of it, I mean, probably people that were pretty happy with their relationships by and large might have just stayed on the East Coast, and so, and then you have people moving west, and that comes down to us through James Bond and men in the emotional life and relationality. I think there's an environmental influence on how we perceive what is acceptable.
Yeah.
But we can't change the human spirit of wanting to relate.
Yes.
And we don't like it. We don't actually like it. Parts of us don't like being tough.
Yes. Well, that's part of it, the stoicism of not showing emotions and being impassive, and that obviously, stay calm and carry on. That's very stoic, and
Yeah.
stiff upper lip and all that, and that's very appealing. It's necessary in some. The British did very
Yes.
fine going into the underground tunnels during the bombings of London and just carrying on.
Yes.
That can be, as you say, that can be a very very valuable trait. There's another thing. I mean, my relatives are from Ukraine and Poland in the early 1900s, and they were peasants. I mean, they came over and they farmed potatoes. That's all that they knew how to do. How does a peasant in Ukraine in say 1918 somehow get the wherewithal to get on a? You'd have to travel first of all across Europe. Somehow, I
Yeah.
don't even know where they parted from. They get into Odessa. I mean,
This,
where'd they get on a
when
boat?
when was this? Was this during the
I think it
famine
was
in Ukraine?
no, no, those were the early 30s. But no,
Yeah. Yeah.
it must have been during the Russian Revolution. So I think it was
Mm.
around 1919. But you're a peasant. You presumably don't have a lot of extra money saved up, and you got
Sure.
to get somewhere to a boat. But you're Ukraine, which is in the middle of the, like you got to travel like 3,000 miles just to get to
Just get the boat.
a to a boat, and then you get on the boat, and you're going. You don't know where, and you end up. I guess they came in Ellis Island. We know this for sure. But out to Long Island and starting potato farming. But
Yeah.
how did peasants do that? I don't think do that out of a stoicism. I don't know what it is. I think it's I'd love to meet them, but I think it's a kind of I want to say it's a toughness which is also unthinking and kind of like a really like tough pack animal knows what direction to go in. It's
It's the
not really
will.
well thought out. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just tough. It's like it's like the calloused hands. It's not any kind of refined thing. It's just calloused hands
Yeah.
that are kind of stumbling towards a better
Which
life.
peasants have. I
Yeah,
mean,
they do.
there's a
Yeah,
bodily expression of that, of an interior reality.
yeah. But you also don't know how smart these people could have been. Just because they've calloused hands and they're very tough
Yeah.
characters doesn't mean they're not also brilliant. And my father was kind of like this. He never went to college. He built houses and he sold life insurance. And he did these kind of simple jobs, but he was like a calculating genius. He got all kinds of problems in his mind he could solve.
Yeah.
His teachers thought he was cheating when he was a kid because he would just come up with math answers and he didn't know where it came from. He was
Yes.
some kind of savant, but you'd never know that because he's
You'd
just
never
some
know
kind of
that.
yeah, he's some person who just sold life insurance.
Yeah.
The son of Ukrainian immigrant.
Yeah. Tough as nails.
Born in the house that his father built.
Mm. Yeah. I think there's such a. I've been having a one-way argument with Matt Walsh on Twitter. He made a statement a couple days ago about how mental health field is a racket, and it's just a heavy emphasis on personal responsibility and choices. And I don't necessarily disagree with him. I don't disagree with him full stop. Certainly that is a dimension to healing and change and operating in a flourishing way. But where the line is in terms of what is the will, and then what becomes just repression of just taking your emotions and burying them down, then it comes out sideways in problematic behaviors, like versus I think a healthy treatment of individuals, which is to acknowledge the will and choice, but to consider relationship patterns which contain the emotional life, important developmental milestones, uh, 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 teaching in the school of love within one's family system. Like all these things do contribute to mental health issues and obstacles to change and whatnot. I don't think it's as simple as just suck it up. There are times where you need to suck it up and go, but usually usually you need to process that afterwards. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't get the chance. I think of like Vietnam veterans. My father was in Vietnam, and there's a whole body of evidence that talks about how they came home, they started a family, they sucked it up, and then when they retired and stopped, all these mental health issues emerged because they never talked about the horrors of what they went through.
Yeah.
So these peasants moving west, I mean, they had to do what they had to do, but I mean, I think someone needs to care for
Yeah.
the emotional life that they had.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And there's nothing is free in life. So if you
Yeah.
suppress those emotions, you're going to have a cost for that. And the question is, what is the cost? And can you try to minimize that damage or the cost? What about the veterans returning from World War II? The greatest generation, and admittedly, what they did was really impressive, and they did it in just 4 years. I mean, just
Yes.
how do you defeat the Nazis and the Japanese imperial regime and do that in 4 years? I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yes.
And but you know what? Then they came home and they raised kids that just went bonkers in the 60s. So they didn't do a particularly good job
Yes.
of raising their children.
They
And
weren't integrated.
is the sort of thing you're talking about maybe the
Yeah.
reason for it? Because they couldn't talk about this stuff. Because I knew my father's generation. He's a little bit too young to fight World War II, but his brother was killed, one of the first casualties in World War II,
Yeah.
and of course my uncle bombed Monte Cassino,
Hmm.
which is his name is was Abbandondolo, so great Italian name, and he
Hmm.
was in a B flying fortress which bombed Saint Benedict's monastery. Do you know the
Wow.
story of Monte Cassino?
Not well. No. Tell me.
Okay, so Monte Cassino was built to around 400 AD, and
Mhm.
it remained standing for all these years until the Second World War. A tremendously historic place inside. It's like a treasure. It's like have you gone to Rome?
I have not.
Well, there's a building in Rome that was built by the emperor. Which emperor was it? The Pantheon.
Mhm.
It's 2,000 years old. Um,
Okay.
it wasn't Nero. It was Augustus, I think. Emperor Augustus, I think, built the
Mhm.
Pantheon. And so, or the Parthenon in Athens. I remember as a kid
Of
reading that
course.
the Parthenon was in perfect condition until in the 1500s. It was used as an armory for storing ammunition, and a stray bomb
Oh,
struck and blew everything up. So it was perfect condition,
yeah.
like until 1500.
I
When
did
you
not
hear
know
that,
that.
you kind of pull your hair out. Like,
I know.
why did they store bombs in the Parthenon? Anyway, Monte
Yeah.
Cassino is the top of this peak, like this cliff peak, in a
Yeah.
in a valley south of Rome, and the Allied forces were pinned down trying to move north through Italy, and it was believed that spotters of their positions were in this monastery. So the American commander gave the command to destroy it.
Hmm.
So the bombers came through one day and they just bombed the smithereens out of Monte Cassino, and my
Hmm.
uncle was flying one of those bombers. And
Oh wow.
I asked him
Wow.
about it. He said, "How could you do this? How could you bomb Monte Cassino?" He said, "We didn't, we just got our orders. We would never
Yeah.
even question our orders. We just got our orders and we bomb Monte Cassino. That's what we're going to do today."
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the irony is there were no German spotters in Monte Cassino.
Oh,
But once it was turned to rubble, it was perfect for hiding spotters. So all the Germans came in and now
that's
took
fine.
Monte Cassino after it was
Oh,
rubble, and clearing them out was the hardest thing. Like fighting that battle, and the Polish troops were famous for how valiant they were in that
what
battle.
a tragedy. What a
I
tragedy.
know, tremendous tragedy.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I want to shift gears a little bit. Um, I like to talk about integration. That's of professional interest to me. And you
Can
know
I
the
just say
word.
something about your other topic before you go on?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
About and a racket.
Yes.
It's a temptation to take things that we have that are the result of developed civilization and treat them as though they're not necessary. I I think it's probably better to say that everything we have is in a certain sense necessary. It's there because it's necessary.
Hmm.
And it's like Tolstoy did this. Like he had this artificial simplicity. Like we don't need all of these things. We should live a simple life. And I
Yes.
think that therapy is like that. That it is really necessary. I mean, you can live without it, but now that we've introduced it, it's like, well, you can live without toothpaste for that matter. I mean, all of
Yeah.
these things, it's better to treat them as necessities. There's a reason why
Yeah.
our forebears
Yeah.
devised them and thought that should be universal. Something
Sure.
else which is similar while we're on the topic is college education. I was astonished
Mm.
to look at Pope Pius XII's Christmas address in 1942. This is the height of World War II. We're just talking about World War II. I'm fascinated with the history of World War II. And he says that he has a kind of 5 plank program for the way the world should reconstruct after World War II. And one of them has to do with the situation of the worker. And an important thing he thinks for the worker is that the children of the working class can go to university and college. Right. And
Right.
this is a basic idea underlying the GI Bill when our soldiers came back from the war. And
Yeah.
and college education has become pretty close to universal. Like 50% of high school graduates go to college.
Yeah.
And if more studied, more kids could go to college. It's like no limit to how many kids could. 80% of high school graduates could go to college if they wanted to and they studied hard enough.
And they can afford it.
This is, yeah, it can be made more affordable and there are different alternatives, but the real cost of college is about $10,000 per year, right? So the sticker price is higher, but there's a kind of redistribution that takes place among the people who can pay the full boat and those can't. But my point is that this is a good thing. Colleges have there's a racket. A lot of them are doing their job well. A lot of them are not doing their job well. A lot of them doing it very poorly. There's a lot of this woke business and cancel culture and all the nonsense in the colleges and universities. This is all true, but still, Pius XII's intuition is correct. I think he'd say the same about your profession. This should be available right after the war. These things are really important. We can't throw them out. They're hard-won gains of civilization. We should not throw them out.
Yeah, no, I think what I do fills a need. I mean, of course, university life fills a need just for the acquisition of knowledge. I think for my field, it fills a need that has arisen because of the breakdown of family life and relationships in a global society.
Well, that's definitely true.
You know, we're all just, I mean, even just something as simple as moving away from home for a job, to say nothing of divorce and like actual broken down nuclear families, but just being away from others.
Yeah.
That's where the therapist comes in.
Well, do you remember, I don't know how far this goes back, but I remember when I was in college, I used to look at the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and have a list of stressors, like stress-inducing things, like put you at risk of various illnesses. The number one stressor was called concentration camp experience. I don't know if that's still the number one stressor on the DSM list. The number two was divorce. So, right. Okay. Well, concentration camp experience. No, thank God I haven't suffered that. Divorce. Well, now we have millions of people lining up, right? So imagine how many people have been divorced in the United States, but let's say it's 40 million people. Imagine 40 million people just got repatriated in our country after being in a concentration camp, say in communist China or Russia, and they just, right, we would walk around and saying, no one needs therapy here.
Yeah.
Like that would be insane.
Yeah.
That would be insane.
It'd be nuts. Yeah. I think the narrative around divorce has changed. I think when I was young, it was pitched as not really of much consequence. It's, you know, if you fall out of love with someone, it's okay. And there's such a thing as a good divorce. And I mean, that just that was in the air when I was going through middle school and high school.
Yeah, we're still friends with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, we're still friends. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, we'll split time with the kids. And then, as is anything, as is always the case, when you find something that's inconsistent with church teaching, over time you realize, oops, maybe divorce isn't so great. And the children of divorce have grown up, and divorce rates are going down now. But it's just because people aren't getting married. They know how terrible divorce is, so they're resistant to getting married. First, it was later and later and later, and then I'm going to wait till I choose the right spouse and develop my career, and maybe in my 30s I'll find someone instead of what was once 22 years old. But I think people are coming to see that divorce is awful. Yeah. It's awful, just based on experience. Yeah. And so, in that space of just breaking down of family life, there has to be a loving replacement. Much of what I do is reparenting.
Yeah. Right. So, yes.
But I mean, I guess this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk about. When I met you, you were at a program. It wasn't quite a university. It's now a university. The Institute for the Psychological Sciences is now Divine Mercy University. And I'm sure you had a certain idea of what integration is at
Mm.
that point. Has that evolved for you? Do you think differently about how philosophy and psychology and theology intersect now? Did it evolve from being there? Do you think about this very much at all?
I'm much more um, focused, you might want to say, or impressed by the need for integration, you might want to call through theology.
Mm,
But I think that very little of our life makes sense unless if it's interpreted relative to God.
yes.
And that there was a long time, or maybe it's not so long, maybe it's 30, 40 years, where it's
Mm,
common in the United States for people to think you could kind of hive off reference to God, and that was embarrassing, or a place where people weren't going to agree,
yeah.
or there's not much you could be said about it. And there probably isn't not much you could say about God if you just say, okay, now let's all turn our attention to God and talk about God. Most people won't have a lot of words to say, but it's like C.S. Lewis said, it's not the light, the flashlight or the fire is not something that you look at. It's that through which you look at everything else. It
Mm,
illuminates everything else.
yes.
So everything else changes its character if we begin to think of it in relationship to God. And I think we're tremendously harmed if we effectively turn ourselves into an atheistic society by observing speech rules or rules of politeness or what's regarded as proper or not, and exclude consideration of God from our relationships, from our thought, from our discussions, from our deliberations. I think that's intensely damaging to the
Yeah.
human person.
Yeah. And I think it's you could enter through either direction. Going through my training at IPS, um, I know that integration was a generally new project where we had scholars on one side and clinicians on the other. And the students were sort of going through the gauntlet. And the
Yeah,
idea is that they come out on the other end hearing both, and they are the product of
that
integration.
that's what Dan Robinson used to say. They
Oh,
do
did
the
he?
integration. Yeah, they do the
Yeah.
integration.
Well, I think that's right. I think um, just from an intellectual perspective, identifying the constitutive components of the human person in some sort of static way, and that's supposed to inform all of psychology, is limited.
Mm,
I don't think that's helps a clinician learn how to help people and incorporate
hmm.
the spiritual dimension into their healing.
Yes.
But what I mean by coming in through both ways, I can understand someone's spiritual life by looking at their family. Certainly. The things that we say about God as adults, we said about our parents when we were children. Will
Mm,
you protect me? Will you guide me? Will you provide me? Will you nurture me? Right? And as we develop and evolve, we're still children of God asking for those things from him. Right? So I can learn about someone's spiritual life and false projections onto God, by way of by way of how they talk about their family. But you
mm,
can also learn about their psychological life by coming in through how they talk about their spiritual life. So
mm,
if I'm working with a client who is sharing their views of who God is, I mean, an extreme hyperbolic example might be, he's sitting on a cloud throwing thunderbolts at me for every
mm.
venial sin. Well, we're not talking about God anymore.
Hmm.
We're talking about your father.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the connection between relationship patterns I thought was missing
Mm,
in the program.
yes. Mm,
That's
great.
what was missing. It was more Thomistic, static, organized, structured, and it wasn't. I don't know. I think when you get into psychodynamic interpersonal theory, it's more complex
Yeah.
than just a listing of, like I said, parts. But
Yeah.
it's just not helpful when it's just a body of knowledge when you're actually trying to help someone. It's to get
Yes.
into their emotional experience and see how, hey, what you believe about God is not so. And maybe
Yes.
as a clinician, I can participate in God's love for you. I'm not him, but I can participate in him and love you the way you were um, meant to be loved. And that can heal your psychological history.
Yes. Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I thought that that was a criticism I made of the program when I arrived, that it was just a matter of structure, studying structure. At least, any kind of psychology that was informed by Thomism was simply a matter of identifying powers,
Yes.
rather than relationships. Yeah, I brought in IDAO and other things, trying to remedy that, but I probably didn't succeed. It's very difficult, but
It is
I think
difficult.
I think what you're saying is really very valuable, because it indicates that there's this realm of, you might want to say, analogous relationships, which is really important to study philosophically, but which
Hmm.
has tended to get neglected. A good
Hmm.
example of where it hasn't been neglected, and it's been very, very, so to speak, sexy, is Rene Girard's understanding of the scapegoating mechanism
Mm.
and mimetic desire. I mean, I think he
Yes.
overplays everything,
Mm.
and sees things that don't exist, and it's not the universal explanation like gravity, which he says it is. But
Can you unpack that a
none
bit for listeners?
right. So Rene Girard believes that, well, he's a literary theorist. He's not primarily a philosopher, but you could say, well, his system is that there's no such thing as just desiring something for itself. Like, I'm hungry, there's a crispy cold apple on the table, I want the apple, right?
Yeah.
So for him, all desire is in relation to someone else whom
Hmm.
we think of as desiring it. So even just desiring that apple would be a matter of my thinking of, well, if there's somebody beside me, he'd probably want to go for that apple also. So you picture
Hmm.
yourself, or how somebody would look on and be delighted if they saw that I got that apple. So you might want to say all desire is social. You could put it that way, perhaps, right?
Hmm.
So, and that's just an apple when I'm alone on the table. But if you take something like, fashion is pretty clearly, you know, I have a beard because other people have beards, right? It's thought to be a cool way to look, to have a beard. And my wife likes my wearing the beard, probably because she is somehow being, there's like this resonance with other people who are liking beards, right? So
Sure.
desire. So that's the character of desire. So Girard says, well, if desire has that character, then it's inevitably um, involves conflict, because not everyone can get the object of desire then, because if we're all imitating everyone else. So there
Yes.
has to be a resolution to form social unity. There needs
Hmm.
to be this resolution of this unsatisfied conflict of desire, which he thinks takes place through the focus of our contentiousness. We kind of all agree, kind of an implicit social contract, to recognize somebody as an outcast and a scapegoat who's outside of this whole process of mimetic desire, and we
Yeah.
just exclude and put this person to death, perhaps as the scapegoat that
Like
purges
Christ.
us. Yep, he gives an interpretation of the crucifixion on these grounds of the
Yes.
meaning, why the Christ affects us so much, because and so that constitutes now us as a society, because we can all turn towards the scapegoat and unify through the scapegoat. So
Yes.
that's his theory, but you could see how it does involve relationships. It is philosophical. Um, it's dynamic. It, I mean, by not dynamic, I mean it says it gives a process or sequence that unfolds over time, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's far, obviously, desire is now being reinterpreted. Desire is nothing like just a component, a faculty within a single person. So there's a social public aspect of desire. So that would be an example of a theory that I think Girard, came up with this idea. He thinks it's like Newton's law of universal gravity that explains everything in the social domain. That's why he's a bit of an eccentric cult type character rather than,
Sure.
I would say, fully balanced thinker. But my point is that that's an example of the kind of thing that should be pursued more.
Yeah. Isn't it the case? I mean, if you start to bring Thomas Aquinas in a bit, isn't all pursuit, isn't desire that which moves us towards the good? It actually has a locomotive dimension to it. And even though all the lowercase g goods, even fashion, is ultimately a desire for relationship and God.
Yeah,
And
that's the most fundamental objection to Girard. Yes, of course. Yeah,
mm,
it is.
yeah,
Yeah, you put your finger on it right away.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
well, what psychology offers to this, uh, conversation is that, and this is where we can lean into theology a bit, is that anxiety, which anxiety did not exist before the fall. Anxiety occurs in the space between myself and another, ultimately between myself and God. And communion with God, there's no more anxiety, and desire is fulfilled. There's that perfect communion with God and the beatific vision, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But all death is, all depression and anxiety ultimately, because those are kind of flip sides of the same coin. You don't really have people who suffer from anxiety without depression. Some are prone to one or the other, but I mean, they're coupled. All of it is fear of death, because death represents the ultimate separation from the other. You can't go with me. I think of Samwise Gamgee. Don't go where I can't follow you, Mr. Frodo. From Lord of the Rings. So anxiety is that separation from other people. In our lives, going all the way back, we start to form these crystallized personality patterns, these defenses, which are designed to keep us in connection with those parental figures. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. But when they become so crystallized and compulsive, and then we can do nothing else but that one thing, and there's no freedom, that because over and over and over again in these relationships, it carries into adulthood. So if I only got attention in my home because I was funny, that's the only time mom and dad gave me attention. That's I learned how to get some kind of care, interest. Well, now I always have to be funny. Now I'm anxious if I'm not funny. Now I suck up all the interest in the room, being funny at the expense of other people. There's nothing wrong with being charismatic and being funny, but there's no flexibility to it. Right. And that's when you start to get into histrionic personality defenses. A lot of actors, a lot of comedians, they can't not be funny. When someone's suffering, they're still looking for the joke when someone's, in front of them being funny. So, and we have these, it's all based on relationship patterns. The patterns embed the psychopathology. And when oftentimes mood disorders are a byproduct of an incongruence between the interior architecture of the personality and the environment. So somebody who's narcissistic might do fine for a long time until they get fired. Now they're anxious and depressed. But the problem isn't just targeting the anxiety and depression with some short-term band-aids or strategies to help you be less depressed. No, it's reshaping the tectonic plates of the personality, which may have been hidden for a very, very long time.
Yes.
And it's all embedded in these personality patterns. So this is what I think good psychology can contribute, to see how these patterns are crystallized. And then as a clinician, you can see how it's actually playing out with you. Because the person isn't just doing it with everyone else. They're doing it with you. And then to provide a corrective experience, which says, I love you even if you're not funny. You are not your gifts. In fact, you can show me these parts of yourself which are sad, which are angry, which are boring, which aren't interesting. And that has no bearing on whether or not I love you.
Yeah.
And that sounds like, subjectively, that seems like an impossibility. As we're going through life, we think if we're smart enough, funny enough, rich enough, whatever, these accidentals, whatever, if we're enough of those things, then we are loved. But that's refuted very easily by just thinking about when you're a parent, right? There's nothing your child could do that make you not love them. You want things to go well for them, so you teach them, but screwing up hurts because you love them. So I don't think people this is the most common, if I had to boil down all of my clinical work, it's the idea, it's the problem of people thinking that they need to earn love, that it's something earned and it's a gift. And I also don't even think we know why we're loved.
Yeah.
Don't the theologians and philosophers wrestle with that question? Why does God love us? I don't know, but he does. Why do we love our children? No, I don't know. Not fully. We can try and describe characteristics, but there's a mysterious quality, right?
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because I think it's a fundamentally Catholic idea that we shouldn't try to earn God's love. But the reformers thought that was specifically Catholic mistake, and they insisted that that's what they meant by salvation, by faith alone, that we don't try to earn salvation through doing works. the Catholic Church never believed that we earn salvation by
No.
doing works. I mean, Jesus wasn't the result of our getting together and working really hard. He wasn't incarnate because we worked really hard. He didn't
Right.
suffer on the cross because we all got together and did all kinds of works. It wasn't a corporate corporation that was formed. But it's kind of interesting. So you've just done something very Girardi, and you've just linked together the primary source of worry and depression to a fundamentally an attitude which is related to a lack of faith. So, and it helps to explain why confidence in God's fatherly care is so good for our psyches too. At the same time,
Yes. Yeah. And the good news, I think, the conclusion of all this, the good news, the gospel, is that death, which represents the ultimate separation. I mean, it's a revolving door for Jesus. He doesn't care.
yeah,
He holds
yeah.
our hands through the doors of death, like he's conquered
Mhm.
that too. And that's the great Christian hope, I think.
But there is an answer why God loves us. God loves us because we're good. We're created good,
Mm-hmm.
and we're made in His image,
Mm-hmm.
and we are as if sons and daughters, even by nature, because we're made in His image. So He doesn't want us to be lost. The devils, when they turned against Him at the first moment of the creation, their choice is fixed. There's no prospect for salvation. They had to choose either to place themselves under God's care or to rebel against Him. And there's no moment in time that takes place in an instant. That process takes
Right.
place in an instant. But for us, the choice of God or against God takes place over a lifetime. And so there's something wrecked in us that God wants to save. That's why He sent His Son.
Mm.
It's still in play. So long as we're alive, it's in play.
Mm.
It's something that He loves dearly that's been wrecked and He wants to restore.
Yeah. Doesn't he? Well, our goodness, though, isn't it dependent upon his goodness? So,
Yes. And furthermore, we're good in being created good. So it's because He saw us as good and then created us according to that conception that we're good. So the love of God is creative. So
yes.
there's a creative love of God, and you might say reactive love of God, where He looks at His creation and then takes delight in it. He rests at the end of every day and He says it's good. That's also
Yeah.
love.
Yeah, I think I was starting into the mystery of the I thou here for me, where I get lost in the multiple subjects, which is that he creates outside of himself, out of nothing, which is not
Yeah.
him, and he sees the goodness which only exists because it's him.
Yes.
We participate in that goodness, but he loves that because of his goodness. But he's not loving himself. He is loving us, which is different than him. So I don't know. There's still a question mark in there for me somewhere in terms of why he loves us, because
Well,
he's not loving himself.
He does. He is loving Himself. I mean, God is
Mhm.
the greatest good. So, if our greatest good consists in loving God above all, since certainly His does. I mean, He loves Himself above all, but He should. That's the nature of love. Love should be attracted to the best object.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why he says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, right.
Yeah. All right. Would you like to talk about this movie you have chosen?
Sure, I would. It affects me profoundly every time I watch it, even though I know how it's going to end.
Tell me why you chose this movie. Tell me more about what you just said.
Well, I find it fascinating because Aristotle, it has to do with friendship, what we've been talking about. So Aristotle says there are various marks of friendship, which she calls philika,
Mm-hmm.
friendly characteristics that we show towards others. So one is pretty obvious, like benevolence. I do something good for you. Like
Yes.
you're feeling ill, and I come over and I bring you a bottle of wine that I know you like, and I just do something good for you, right? That's pretty obvious. Another thing that he mentions is just wanting somebody to exist and to be, like on birthday. What is it we celebrate? The mere existence of another person.
Yeah.
Another thing that he mentions is coincidence of wants. So we get along with somebody, we have the same likes, we have the same dislikes. That's very characteristic of obviously if we're at odds all the time and you want to go to a Mexican restaurant and I want to go to an Italian restaurant, it's inherently not a friendly thing because they're always at odds. And then another is he taking pleasure and pain in the same things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we typically think of that as taking place at the same time.
Yes.
But what's beautiful, I think what's brilliant about this movie is abstracts from time and the love of the male protagonist, Rex, for his partner. They weren't
Yes.
married, but what's his name? Her name is Sophie. Isn't it
I have it.
Rex?
I have it written down. No, it's not. It's not a typical. It's not an English name.
It's like Satya, Sonia, something like that.
Yeah, Satya. Well, I'll find it 1 second.
Something like that.
Anyway, go
It's
on. Yeah.
maybe it's Norwegian. It's originally Norwegian or Dutch.
Saskia. Saskia.
Saskia. It's originally
Yeah.
Dutch.
Yeah.
Saskia. The love for her transcends any of these other characteristics. He wants to be with her by experiencing the same thing that she experiences.
Mm.
So if you want to say, look, if you take the least, it's probably the least salient dimension of love, and you make it the most important. The way it becomes the most important is because you really love this other person a lot. It's like testimony to the love which is stronger than death, which Rex has to Saskia, that he wants to experience that she experienced.
Harry Stack Sullivan talks about this. He's the great interpersonal therapist, and he talks
Sure,
about
yeah,
how,
of course, I know his work.
yeah, the moment I tell you about what it's like inside of me, it's now entered into the interpersonal domain, and it's not what it's like inside of me. But that doesn't mean we don't want it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of Eucharistic communion, where
Yeah.
the Spirit is actually interior to us. But
Yeah.
we want that connection, but we don't actually ever get it with another human being. Like even in the case of Rex in this film, he did not experience what she experienced, a version of it, but his filter through which he experienced it is different.
Yes, that's true. That's for sure.
Yeah.
He experienced what she wanted to experience. She wasn't experiencing what he wanted to experience, or what he experienced. He experienced what she had experienced. She didn't experience what he had experienced. She went first. He went second.
Yeah, well, what she was terrified to experience, as reflective in her dreams and the premonitions about it. What do you make of that? The dreams and the yellow egg and everything else.
Yeah, I've never given that much weight to it. I've just thought of more of it as kind of a filmography device rather than a real story or philosophical consideration. But that's a really interesting question. Maybe it represents. Now I'm really thinking on my feet. It represents the idea that we all have to die alone, right? So everybody says that we die alone. I've seen people die. You probably have too. When you die, you become very detached from everything. Like, there could be an emergency, or I don't know, water's boiling over, or the plumbing problem or something. None of that matters. Like something that seemed really, really important to you, maybe a day before, it's just no longer important. So in that sense, the fact that you are completely detached from everything and you're going off to die, it is like a cocoon. It is isolation. Can we say what happens at the end of this film? It is like being buried alive. And it's like, and but what's interesting is that most people do become reconciled to dying when they are actually dying, because they understand, they've had time to prepare, they see that it's coming, and so on. You might ask the question, what's different between being buried alive by a madman, kind of waking up from being drugged and realizing you're in a coffin, you can't get out, you're underground? I don't know if you ever realized that. I mean, why would she think she'd be underground? When she thinks she's just in a box? I don't know how you know that you're buried underground if you are buried underground.
Probably
What's
just
the difference?
being unable to push it,
Yeah, I mean, it could be just nailed down, but maybe, it would be maybe in the movie there should have been a note, "I buried you underground," But what's the difference between that and being caught in an avalanche and you find that you're buried under snow and you can't get out? Is there any difference between those two things? Why is the one horrific? Why is the one horrific and the other doesn't seem as horrific? I mean, obviously, no one wants to die in an avalanche, but doesn't seem as horrific.
Well, I think subjectively you can target with your ire the cause, the person who has done it. And
Yeah.
I think that's different. You can take all of your, I mean, meaningless suffering is worse than
Yes.
suffering. That's the
Yes.
worst thing there is. And so
Yes.
when we're in a place of suffering, an avalanche, that's actually probably more psychologically difficult to deal with because
Yeah.
it's just happenstance. Whereas
Yeah.
this person did this to me, I can
Yes.
find meaning and I can villainize them and I can
Yes.
thirst for justice and be angry. So I think
Yes.
that accounts for the difference.
Yeah. Do you know the short story by isn't it Edgar Allan Poe, this Cask of Amontillado? Do you know this short
I
story?
do. I know a lot of Poe. Which one is it? You have to remind me.
This is one where somebody wants revenge against somebody else. I think one of them is called Fortunatus, and I can't remember the other character.
Okay.
But he kind of plays along with him and plays up to his ego and makes him think that he's this very fine cask of Amontillado. He wants to show him the cellar. And I think the guy's
Yes.
inebriated, so leads them down in this kind of dark maze of caves under the castle. And they get to the end of one of these caves, and he chains him up, and then he starts walling him in with bricks. So
Yes,
he ends
I
up
do remember this.
I think he's getting revenge on him for maybe, I don't know, maybe it's adultery with his wife or some other business swindle or
Yeah, I
something
was gonna
like
say I think
that.
it was business swindle if I recall. Yeah.
Yeah. So but it's a similar thing, isn't it? Except even there it's understandable. There's a sense in which this Fortunatus guy, whoever his name is,
Yeah.
I mean, he justly deserves punishment. I mean, not at the hands of this private citizen, but
Yes.
in God's hands for sure. But
Yes.
Saskia didn't deserve anything whatsoever. She's completely
No.
innocent, just a
No.
random victim.
Right.
So
Which
it
is
has a horror of a random victim, has a horror of being buried alive. It has a horror of malicious act done against you deliberately. It has a horror of separation. Has a horror of the sudden reversal of going on a fun vacation in southern France to being this
well.
perfect world.
Well, I would argue that the actual horror is that it's not malicious. That's the
Hmm.
most horrifying part.
That's a whim. It's kind of like
On the
like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. It's just
but
like it's a logical difficulty.
it's a philosophical exercise on the part of the sociopath.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
not targeting someone because of some injustice, and he
yes,
feels. I mean, what is common among those who suffer in this way is a complete lack of empathy.
yeah,
He's not thinking about Saskia's. He's wondering, what kind of person am I? What does it mean if I don't jump off this building?
yes.
I wonder. Let's try and just risk my life and limb to jump off this building.
So, as a psychologist, what did you think about him and the film in general? And
Ah,
what do you think about me? That it was for a while my favorite film. I tell people it's my favorite film, just kind of to shock and scandalize
well, I do want to talk about you for in a moment,
them.
but about the character itself. My model for providing direct care and clinical services nowadays does not include diagnoses.
Mm,
So in we created a new model for care, which includes heavy spiritual elements. It exists outside of the secular field of psychology, and we call it a mentorship. So I'm out of the diagnosis game.
So
It's
that means
been some time.
how do you get insurance reimbursement without a DSM category to assign somebody to?
We don't.
Okay,
We don't. People pay out of pocket. And
right,
it's a totally different model, which I can talk about. I mean, link is in the
sure.
comments if you want to learn about that. That's an aside. But for me personally, when I was watching this, I had to do a little brushing up on
Mm,
understanding what was happening with this individual,
mm,
and there's some semantic differences between a narcissist, a sociopath, a psychopath, and this is why I don't really like diagnoses. Is because
mm,
there's a heavy degree of subjectivity in
yes,
diagnosing someone.
yeah,
To say nothing of the stigma that comes with being diagnosed with something, which proposes
mm,
that someone doesn't have the will to change. And I
mm,
am this diagnosis. There's all kinds of problems with diagnosis. But I mean, there is, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a value, at least in speaking with other professionals about what sort of commonalities there are with someone and what kind of trajectory for treatment we could agree on would be helpful for this person.
yes,
So, but I still had to go back and do some research. One of the distinctions I heard is that a psychopath has the problem is largely neurological and organic, and there's issues with the parasympathetic nervous system. So they're or the sympathetic nervous system rather. They don't get stressed in difficult situations. The PET scans show that the psychopath, the parts of the brain don't light up, which are involved with empathy, right? So that's the psychopath. It's more of an organic issue. The sociopath is made, right? It's a reflection of environmental experiences. He calls himself a sociopath, but how these words are used change. I mean, I've heard some people say that the antisocial personality disorder is what a sociopath is. And antisocial in the sense that it's against social norms. So it's not, I don't want to go out on a Friday night, which people commonly use the term I'm antisocial. No, it means rules don't apply to me. And ultimately that's not about trusting the rule giver. So I don't trust rules because I don't trust the rule giver, and I've been hurt in my developmental history, and thus, I don't have any value for rules. Going back to our earlier conversation about parenting and having a relationship there, it becomes an arbitrary tyrant. The rule giver becomes an arbitrary tyrant. So, but when I look at this man, I'm almost all the way there in terms of how he's presented, whether or not that's psychologically consistent with a sociopath or a psychopath.
Yes.
But one of the problems I have is it didn't really reflect the impulsivity associated with that personality profile.
Yeah.
So he probably would not be able to have a stable job at a university level and have all this healthy attachment with his family.
Yes.
Sooner or later, something would have come up where he could not consistently maintain a stable life and what appears to be a healthy life. Now, sociopaths and psychopaths can fool people.
Yes.
They can gaslight you, make you, they're charismatic. They can make you feel like they care about you. But sooner or later, someone's going to pick up on it. Yep. A wife probably would have picked up on it. And this is an important fact because that's the reason why she got in the car.
Yeah. Right.
She saw the picture of his family.
Yes.
So in that sense, from a psychologist's point of view, it's a little fantastical.
Yes, I can see that. Yep.
Yeah. As far as what does it say about you? I mean, I couldn't help but think of, I think an important moment in the film was when he was walking with his friend later on, years later. And he says something to the effect of, I admire his persistence in still trying to find his friend.
Yes.
And the friend says, it's an obsession. It's not perseverance. It's an obsession. So there's two very different takes on why he was connected and still couldn't let it go.
Yes.
I couldn't help but think about how you've lost your wife.
And
I couldn't help but think of your own process of grief.
Yeah.
And wrestling within yourself about what it was like to lose your spouse, the mother of your first 6 children, I think
7. But one died in child with SIDS.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there's some kind of unconscious draw to making sense of something that will, on a very natural human level, will always be terrible and will never make sense. I recall years ago you said to me, we were talking about whether or not there is one person for every person, whether or not someone could be the one. And that after your wife had passed away, you wrestled with this question, and that the most romantic thing would be for you to never marry again. And then you started to come out of that space and realize, no. That would be idolizing romance.
Yes.
And a marital dynamic. And that I have children that need a mother.
Yes.
And in some ways, my wife blessed your experience of her blessing in her sickness, this new marriage. And that created a pathway for you to be open again, open your heart up again to a new loving dynamic.
Yes.
But I think just the psychologist in me can't turn off the possibility of a part of you in your unconscious still wondering about what it means to move on, quote unquote. You don't really move on, but move past the grief of your wife's passing.
That could be the case, because, of course, these things would change over time, and that kind of grief would diminish over time.
Yeah.
And heal. These things heal very slowly. Maybe they don't ever heal. There's always a scar,
Yes.
as my late wife said about her child that she lost, so that it never
Yes.
really goes away. There's always a scar there. But
Yeah.
it's no longer my favorite film, and
Hmm.
hasn't been for 5 years or maybe even 10 years. So
That's
I
interesting,
think
isn't it?
you're very astute. Yeah, it could be the case. Yeah,
Yeah.
because of the pain is very great. So you could say, to lose somebody's close to you, you could say there's a certain kind of joy in having somebody experience what you experience. They watch the film and they're attached to Saskia and then to Rex, and they feel pain, and they're in their place of Saskia and Rex when they're buried alive.
That's why I
Oh,
have this segment. That's why I do this. I
yeah,
know that people's choice of movies mean something to them and are they're sharing an
yes,
important part of themselves too with me.
yeah, yeah. So if I ask you to watch this film and there's still this residuum of grief, then I'm asking you to join me in the grief. I'm asking you to enter to be buried alive as I was. That's what I'm asking
Yes.
you to do.
Yes. And that, I mean, yes, you were buried alive
Yeah,
at the loss of your wife.
yeah,
Terrible.
yeah,
And so, perhaps even to this day, it's the film is a memory, even if
yeah,
the grief diminishes.
yeah.
We talk about how oftentimes when we lose someone, we don't want the pain to go away.
Mm,
We don't want to forget them because the pain is a
yes,
reminder of who they were. Even if we forget their face, we forget the sound of their voice, we hate that we're forgetting it.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's this aspect of something that was very happy and was, working well that got destroyed.
Yes.
Apparently randomly, but somebody gets
Right.
cancer and who knows why. But yeah, but it did, and there's this kind of shock of you never expected that. So also the aspect in my own life of losing my wife, never anticipated that, of course, when we're
Sure.
recording and having lots of kids. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's very astute, Brian. So I think that's probably the main explanation for it, because it's a moderately good film, and I think it does have that aspect of philosophical interest, but not so much that you'd think it would be maybe your most favorite film. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's an emotional dimension to it.
yeah,
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, as you were saying, uh, about the seeming randomness of your wife's passing and her
mm,
death, and it just felt just reckless and awful. I mean, that's what Saskia went through. There
yeah,
was She was randomly chosen. There were circumstances. I do think this show does play with the movie does play with providence and fate a bit. The
yes,
killer even says so.
yes,
If I hadn't, I forget what it was. I forget what it was. Oh, he sneezed.
mm,
He was gonna abduct another woman, but then he sneezed, and then he went to the bathroom and laughed, and then she was just like
yeah,
basically courting him to abduct her in
yeah,
terms of her openness and her free spirit, which I think is reflective of two people in love. She
mm,
fell down and she was being silly, and there was a real lightheartedness and beauty
yeah,
to their life at that moment. And
yes,
so she had no fear of
yeah,
danger, and she was just talking to the stranger. Little did she know. But
mm,
when he's telling Rex later on about it, he's saying, this is the way it happened. And that I
yeah,
think also plays into the dream and the premonition,
mm,
and also the bizarre experience of, I mean, I knew what the film was about vaguely, but of course I didn't know how it was going to happen. So when the
mm,
car breaks down in the dark tunnel where you
yes,
would expect it to happen,
yes,
it's a precursor, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
but she's there on the other side of the tunnel.
yeah,
She's safe. And
yep,
then in the light of day, when you least expect it, in a very public place, this
mm,
terrible thing happens.
yeah,
We cannot predict tragedy.
yeah, yes. Yeah, so the film does have a lot of deep messages and things to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking.
There's a remake that America did, that Hollywood did, and you
Hmm.
should watch that. It's also called The Vanishing, but it's terrible and has a happy ending. So Rex gets kind of dug up, and
Oh,
before he dies, somebody just knows that he's there and actually saves him at the end.
Oh,
Can you believe it? Happy ending?
just ruined. And does that even
Uh,
make it happy? Is my question.
no, it's just foolishness. Yeah,
Yeah, that's upsetting. I
just
think
turns a
too.
it turns a deep philosophical art house movie into just this kind of a stupid
Yeah,
thriller.
yeah. Um, the- Going back to my other thought about my original thought about how it may not be a consistent psychological presentation of the killer.
Mm,
Uh, I do think that we have safeguards. I do think that we have safeguards against not everyone, but I think if you're astute, you can have safeguards against putting yourself in dangerous positions with dangerous people.
yeah.
And something I was upsetting about the film was it. I think it can elicit anxiety and dread
Mm,
about the dangers of being in the world.
mm,
And I would like to think, I mean, I guess ultimately you can't control for that, but I would
yes.
like to think that we can responsibly protect ourselves and women
Yeah.
can responsibly protect themselves.
Yes.
I guess the last thought that I had, reflection I had, was how casually they dealt with infidelity in the film.
Hmm.
That the family talked about. The daughter asks him, "Do you have a mistress?" It would make
Yeah.
sense about it for a man your age, and she was okay with it. And I don't know if this is Dutch culture or I mean, there's some French in it. I don't know, but and then later he's given the advice to go to the gas station by his daughter's volleyball coach, who he meets on the street, who he was going to
I remember
abduct.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was going to abduct her, and
She
she didn't
thought he
know he
was
was going to
just she thought he
hitting
was
on her,
picking up, just picking. Yeah, exactly.
and she was going to go with it.
Yeah.
And then she said, "Well, okay, well, if you don't want to have an affair with me because I'm known, why don't you go to a gas station? You can find some random to have an affair with."
I know.
That was awful.
Well, I mean, that's in the well, the first case, I've forgotten this thing about the volleyball teacher. Um, the first case is there is, in France, there's this. It's not a good custom, but of having a mistress on the side. That's very, very common.
Ugh.
So I just take that to be kind of just standard middle class French
Mm.
manners. Not good at all, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, the volleyball coach, I forgot that. But was she really going to go with him? I don't think she was. I think she was.
Yeah. No, she's like, "There's a cafe right over there. Let's go. Let's go have a coffee. Do you want to? Let's go." And then
Yeah.
when he's like, "No, no, thank you," then she's like she made it explicit. She
Mm,
made it explicit, and she says, "Look, if you're looking for someone,
yeah.
go to a random gas station with
I
tourists."
mean, you can't expect good morals from film producers of art house films. I'm just sad.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure it reflects that, doesn't reflect anything, but
Yeah.
anyway.
What did you think about the main character? I mean, the killer. What was your impression of him? What did you think about him?
I don't really have a lot of thoughts about him. I mean, I thought the idea of, he wanted to jump from the balcony and then he actually did jump. I thought that was kind of unusual because a lot of people do have this impulse to jump when they're on a high spot, right?
Yeah.
And I remember once when I was an undergraduate, there was a woman, have to look up her name, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who actually was a disciple of Freud and knew Freud and studied with Freud and was a Freudian. And I
Mm.
can't remember what her name was. She's very prominent, but I met her as a Callow undergraduate, and I said, "Well, what? Tell me what's wrong with me, because sometimes when I'm on a high ledge, I have this impulse to jump."
Yeah.
And she said, her response was, "Well, we live in a modern industrial society. All kinds of people are going to have neuroses like that. It's not surprising." That's all that she said about it.
That's a terrible thing to say.
I know. It's like, well,
You're one of
that's
those many problematic people. That's all.
yeah, we can't do much about it. But I wonder, and it is a perverse thing, but I wonder how many people have that impulse to jump, and then I probably a lot, and then nobody does. That's kind of it's kind of an
Yeah.
interesting thing. It's not a real impulse if nobody ever jumps on it,
Yeah.
based on it.
Right. The temptation is not the impulse
So
control problems.
I thought that was kind of interesting that the screenwriter for this film actually thought about that. I think it's a common phenomenon, and said, well, let's come up with somebody who actually does jump, because nobody ever does. Nobody ever does. I think I agree with you. He's not a realistic character. He's kind of, just a
Yeah.
bizarre person.
I mean, a lot of it. There's a lot of overlap with that kind of presentation, but
Yeah.
he's still playing the game too, because the jumping off the windowsill there, they connect that with when he jumped off the bridge to save the drowning child.
Yeah. Right.
He had no hesitation or emotional resistance.
Yeah.
And then jumped, and the daughter says, "Oh, you're a hero, father.
Yeah.
You're a hero." And he said, "Don't trust heroes because they're impulsive."
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You've watched this more recently than I have. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, I just wonder. I mean, that's probably the other hole in the presentation of him, is he does have some empathy. I mean, it seems like he cares about his daughter, and he also when he's talking to Rex later on, he said, "I was able to enter into your mind, so that's how I know that you're going to choose this." Well,
yeah.
Empathy is required to enter into someone's mind, and sociopaths typically don't have empathy. I mean, maybe understanding without caring, maybe, but a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to say about the film?
Yeah, don't watch the American remake. Stick with the Dutch.
It was good. I'm glad I watched it.
Yeah. Good.
Anything, this has been awesome. I'm so grateful. Anything that you would want to plug? Anything that you want to get out there where people can find you and discover your thoughts and ideas well,
I mean, 3 of my popular books, if they're available right there on Amazon. I've started writing a series of 4 books on the Gospels. So I have a book called Memoirs of St. Peter, and translation and commentary on the Gospel of Mark. And so I say translation with commentary, but it's actually a kind of a re-envisioning or rethinking of what the Gospel of Mark was about, as Mark being Peter's scribe and actually listening to Peter's words and kind of capturing the sound of Peter's words when he's writing his Gospel. Oh, wow. Then Mary's Voice in the Gospel according to St. John. This is a book that is based on the tradition, or it starts from the tradition that when Jesus died on the cross, he gave Mary to John to take care of, and she entered his household, as it's said in the Gospel, and lived with him for 30 years on the best evidence. Yeah. And then he probably wrote his Gospel of John 20 years after that. So my question is, if Mary, the Mother of God, lived with one of the apostles for 30 years, wouldn't that make a difference in how he wrote the Gospel? So it's looking at the well-known differences between the Gospel of John and the Synoptic Gospels, see whether they can be accounted for from the idea that Mary lived with him.
Yeah.
And I think they can be successfully. And then there's, we mentioned my late wife. There's a book about her called The Appalling Strangeness of the Mercy of God.
Yes.
Which is very inspiring account of how somebody who, diagnosed at a young age with cancer, faced death with a lot of faith and with a lot of courage. And so I think those are all 3 of them, I think, are helpful books. So I can promote them because I think I'm promoting the Gospel.
That's
promote
wonderful.
them quite happily.
And you still have your blog, and you're still writing articles now in live time.
I write for the Catholic Thing, so if you'd like to read me on a regular basis, subscribe to the Catholic Thing.
That's great. Again, thank you so much,
Bryan. It's been a pleasure, and I'll be assured of my prayers for the success of your efforts, so you don't have to worry about them or think about them.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and I will also pray in kind for you.
Thank you. Thanks.